So in an odd twist of fate, due to the 2311 Front Row Motorsports lawsuit against NASCAR, it has now been confirmed that 2311 does in fact have a third charter for next season. So let's get into all of that. Coming up next. What's going on, everybody? Hope you're doing good today. All right, let's jump right into it. This from Bob Pockris. Going through the lawsuit again, it does say 2311 and Front Row Motorsports have entered into purchase agreements for a third charter from another racing team whose owner has signed the 2025 charter agreements. The Front Row Motorsports deal was completed in May, 2311 deal August 7th, both with SHR. All right, so strangely enough, because of the ongoing litigation between NASCAR and 2311 and Front Row Motorsports, we now know that 2311 does in fact have a third charter. Now, who's going to drive that car? It's been rumored for a long time that it's going to be Riley Herbst. I'm going to go with that. Monster Energy will probably be a partial sponsor there. Of course, it hasn't been announced. This isn't the way I would imagine 2311 wanted to announce it. So we'll just have to wait on details and further confirmation. But I'm going to take a wild guess and say Riley Herbst will probably be the driver in that car. Other names you could throw out there, of course, would have to be Corey Heim and other Toyota drivers. So kind of strange that that's not the bigger part of the story. That you would imagine 2311, having the third team would be the bigger part of the story. Unfortunately, it's not, because there is ongoing litigation between 2311, Front Row Motorsports, and NASCAR. 2311 and Front Row Motorsports put out a joint statement yesterday. We share a passion for racing, the thrill of competition and winning. Off the racetrack, we share a belief that change is necessary for the sport we love. Together, we brought this antitrust case so that racing can thrive and become a more competitive and fair sport in ways that will benefit teams, drivers, sponsors, and most importantly, fans. I've been part of this racing community for 20 years and couldn't be more proud of Front Row Motorsports team and our success. But the time has come for change. We need a more competitive and fair system where teams, drivers, and sponsors can be rewarded for our collective investment by building long-term enterprise value, just like every other successful professional sports league. Front Row Motorsports owner Bob Jenkins. So there you go. Now we know the deal. We know what it is. It is going to be an antitrust suit against NASCAR. Basically, saying it's not fair dealing with NASCAR. However, they're going to argue that. We're actually going to get into the nuts and bolts of what they're going to argue here in just a minute, so I'm going to save that for that. But obviously his reasoning here, he says, is he wants a more fair deal for teams and fans. So he is here trying to curry favor with the fans by including them in this, saying, hey, the fans are getting screwed over here too, just like the teams are getting screwed over. So he is angling that, and that was definitely worded with the fans in mind to get the fans on the side of Front Row Motorsports in 2311. And of course, him saying it's time for change, he has said multiple times this isn't the 1960s anymore. NASCAR can't continue to run itself like it is the 1960s. So that is the reason he says it is time for change. Basically insinuating that NASCAR's model is archaic and just is not with the times. This via Jayski. 2311 and Front Row Motorsports have retained attorney Jeffery Kessler, whose legal victories include the creation of NFL free agency, the implementation of name and image likeness deals in college athletics, and winning equal pay for the U.S. women's national soccer team. Kessler told The Athletic every major sport goes through a transformation, usually by the application of antitrust laws, sometimes some other major transformative event, and this lawsuit, he said, is NASCAR's moment. Okay, so there you go. There is the lawyer who is going to be involved in that, Jeffery Kessler. He went up against the NFL, and he was able to argue in that particular case that, you should be able to be a free agent. That was a major victory in that era, so he's gone up against the NFL and won. And more recently, he went up against the NCAA, where the NCAA was not letting their athletes use their name and likeness to enrich themselves, and he said that that's not a fair practice, which that practice had gone on for a very long time. He was able to go up against the NCAA, another huge organization, and was able to defeat them. And then, of course, he was able to get the U.S. women out of a contract that they signed with the U.S. Olympic Committee. He was able to go up against the U.S. Olympic Committee with, which I think is his most impressive thing that he's done, able to get them out of a contract that they signed and was able to renegotiate that contract. So Jeffery Kessler definitely has the street cred, the experience, whatever you want to call it. Politics aside, all of that stuff, all of those things have politics aside. The only reason I'm mentioning them and what he accomplished and what he did is to show that he is an impressive lawyer. He is able to go up against these big mega corporations, sports leagues, whatever you want to call them, and he is able to get results. So his track record speaks for itself, regardless of all the political stuff, which I really could care less about. However, you can have a really good lawyer, but it begs the question, do you have a case? And if you have a case, what are you going to argue? Well, we've got this clip from Dirty Mo Media, so let's see what the lawyer himself, Jeffery Kessler, had to say.
So, nice to meet you, caller. Thanks for having me. This is an antitrust case. An antitrust case is a case which argues that the rules of competition are being violated. We have antitrust laws that regulate competition. What we are arguing here is that NASCAR is a monopoly. No surprise to NASCAR fans, there is no alternative to NASCAR, not just in this country, but frankly around the world. And it got its monopoly illegally. And the reason it got it illegally is because it tied up all the racetracks in the country, because it doesn't let any of the teams compete for any other racing circuit, because it seizes the intellectual property of the next gen cars so that those are locked in to NASCAR. And it engages in all of these restrictions so that the teams have no one else to deal with and the fans have no one else to deal with. What NASCAR then did, because it's run basically as the private enterprise of the France family to benefit them, is use that monopoly to force terms, economic terms on the teams that they barely can afford to be in NASCAR. In 2016, they started what's called a charter system, where the teams could pay millions of dollars to have the right to compete. There were 15 teams in 2016. 9 of them are already out of business and had to be replaced because they can't afford to put in tens of millions of dollars a year into these teams and pay the drivers. And all the money goes to the France family, right? That's how NASCAR is run. So the teams can barely make it, and the drivers make even less because they're just getting a piece of what the teams get. So something had to change. On September 6th, NASCAR, using its monopoly, went to all the teams at 5 o'clock and said, here's a 100-page agreement. Either accept it by 6 or you cannot have a charter to compete. Most of the teams folded because they couldn't afford to fight NASCAR. They couldn't risk their franchise. They couldn't risk their employees. 2 teams, my clients, did not fold. That's Front Row, and that's 2311. They decided somebody has got to stand up to this bully. Somebody has got to say enough is enough, and that they are going to file this lawsuit so that NASCAR could come into the 21st century and give these teams and drivers a fair economic chance to match the fact that NASCAR fans do not go to see these races to watch Jim France. They go to watch these races for these teams and these drivers.
All right, so long clip there, even longer clip if you go to the Dirty Mo Media YouTube page or whatever, however you want to watch it. About a 15-minute clip. I would suggest watching the whole thing, but I just want to take this small snippet of that clip and sort of expound on what he's saying here. He's arguing that NASCAR is a monopoly and they're using monopolistic practices to enrich themselves And he points to things like exclusionary practices specifically, where NASCAR owns tracks and they're not allowing teams to go to other tracks and race at other tracks. NASCAR owns the cars. They own the intellectual property to the cars that they actually race now, whereas back in the day, the teams were building the cars. Now the cars are built by NASCAR vendors. And even beyond that, NASCAR tells you which vendor you can go to. So it's created an unfair competitive marketplace, I guess is what he's trying to argue here with these exclusionary practices. Whereas in a free market, let's just take example, the rims, right? You can only get the rims from a certain vendor. Whereas in a free market, you could, get the rims from wherever, whoever. So, that's the argument he's making as far as that goes. He goes on to say that because of these exclusionary practices, specifically since the charter agreement has been signed, that of those 15 original teams, 9 of them have already gone out of business and had to sell because of these alleged exclusionary practices. So the model itself is not fair to the teams. And of course, he points out the September 6th deadline that NASCAR gave all the teams, said either sign this or lose your charter forever. He's saying that because NASCAR is a monopoly, because in his opinion, you can't race stock cars and make a living anywhere else. Anything else you race stock cars in, you would have to be semi-pro. NASCAR is therefore a monopoly. Obviously, there's open wheel, but that's not stock cars. So, IMSA, owned by NASCAR, their biggest, I guess, closest competitor would be ARCA. NASCAR bought ARCA, so on and so forth. So he's arguing NASCAR is a monopoly. And when they put this deadline in front of them, the teams really didn't have an option. So that's what he is arguing there about the deadline. And 2 of these teams stood up. He's basically saying they're not going to be bullied. So he's saying NASCAR probably wasn't expecting 2 of these teams to stand up. He also goes on to argue that the France family is the only one being enriched by this business, that nobody else is really making money, and nobody comes there to see the France family. They come there to see the drivers race. So it's time for a fair and equal pay opportunity for everyone involved in NASCAR. So it's going to be very, very interesting, but that is the argument. I'm not saying I agree or disagree with it. I'm just saying that is the argument that Jeffery Kessler is laying out there that they're apparently going to take before the courts here. However, the immediate question that is begged is, why did all the other teams sign the agreement if it was so unfair? To which you see his response here from Adam Stern, who's quoting him, 2311 in front row, the France family and NASCAR are monopolistic bullies, and bullies will continue to impose their will and hurt others until their targets stand up and refuse to be victims. That moment has now arrived. So his argument there, once again, is they're being bullied, and they're just, the other teams are not standing up to the bullies. And 2311 Front Row Motorsports, in Kessler's opinion, are the 2 that are going to stand up to the bully in this case. So a lot to break down. I could have made this video probably an hour long with just so many different directions you can go with it. But for the immediate future, here's what probably you need to focus on, and here's which way it will probably go. The next big event in this will be the basically hearings or whatever to decide whether or not this is actually going to be able to be brought to trial by a judge. And in that, NASCAR is going to pull out all of their big guns to say that this is a frivolous lawsuit, that it shouldn't have been filed, it has no merit, things like that. And of course, 2311 Front Row Motorsports and Kessler are going to argue it is a lawsuit worth having. So that's going to be the next big hurdle in all of this if you're 2311, or where you want to immediately quash it if you're NASCAR. So that's going to be the next big main event, and it's going to be very contentious. I think NASCAR is going to fight very hard to get this lawsuit completely thrown out, and here's why. If Kessler, 2311, and Front Row Motorsports are successful here, it will open up NASCAR to discovery. And discovery is the process of the Kessler and 2311 and Front Row Motorsports. They'll be able to go through NASCAR's financial records. NASCAR would have to unseal them so that they could go through them to have evidence for the trial at hand. And immediately right there, you should see the problem. NASCAR does not want anybody to have their records, their financial records. They've been very guarded since the inception of NASCAR. They don't want anybody to have those records. And so therefore, I think NASCAR is going to fight very hard to get this thrown out. And if NASCAR loses getting this trial thrown out, then I think you see NASCAR go back to the negotiating table with at least 2311 and Front Row Motorsports, because they don't want those files to get out. So basically what I see here is a fight for discovery. And if 2311 and Front Row Motorsports get discovery, then they have some leverage in this bargaining agreement, and you could see all of this go back to negotiations. So it's going to be a lot to uncover. I personally don't think this will ever go all the way to trial. 2311 and Front Row Motorsports might win and get this to go to trial, but I don't think it will ever actually go to trial, because I think if they win the opening hearings where they say it can go to trial, it will then have discovery. With that leverage of discovery, they'll settle this out of court. So I think either way, I don't think this ever sees trial, because NASCAR doesn't want their records public. But which way it actually goes, does 2311 win discovery, the ability to get discovery, or not win the ability to get discovery? Either way, I don't see this actually ever going to a full-on trial. That being said, I'm not a legal expert. Who knows what's actually going to happen when all this plays out? Maybe 2311, once they get discovery, they don't care. They just want to take this all the way to the finish line. You never know what's trying to be accomplished, the real motivations behind everybody here. But yeah, that's just my 2 cents on it. Everybody else is going to give their 2 cents on it too. That's just my opinion, but let me know your opinion down in the comments down below, and that's all I got for you on this one. If you made it this far, I would love to have your subscription. If not, I'll just keep making these things. If you're already subscribed, you know I appreciate you all as well. If you got a question, comment, or anything like that, like I said, leave it in the comments. And if you want to help out the channel, visit the merch store. The link is in the description. And other than that, thanks for your time. Peace.